Tell me if you've ever heard something like this. There's a guy, John Doe, and someone goes up to John Doe and talks to him a little bit and says, "Oh, so where are you from, John?" And John has like a freak out and says, "What business is yours? I mean, why are you asking me this question? Ah!" Yeah, he has a disproportionate response to a perfectly innocuous question. But what happens if the question is a little bit more pointed? What happens if, the guy is asked, "Are you gay?" And like maybe it's sort of like mocking, maybe it's trying to get a rise out of him, and the guy explodes. What then? What does it signify? It actually doesn't matter what it signifies. What matters is that there is something there. If a guy explodes and says, "Why are you asking me these questions?" If you ask him something as innocuous as, "Where do you come from?" Or if he explodes when you ask him, "Are you gay?" Right? Maybe you're trying to mock him and he explodes and he doesn't answer the question, right? But his emotional outburst is answer enough. And that, of course, is the point. See, a lot of times, in the desire not to answer a question, the way you refuse to answer the question is an answer in and of itself. And that's why when somebody asks you a question that you don't want to answer, right, for whatever reason, you have to have a strategy to give a non-answer. To give an answer that is not an explosion, to give an answer that is not, "I don't have to answer that question," to give an answer that sort of like erases or makes the question vanish into thin air, makes it go poof. There are actually a lot of ways to handle a question you don't want to answer. Yeah. Well, first, the most obvious is you ignore it. Somebody asks you a question, like, "Are you gay?" And you just smile and ignore it and start talking about something else. A lot of times, somebody might be asking you something, trying to get a reaction out of you, trying to get a rise out of you, and the absolutely best response in that situation is to just pretend you didn't even hear the question. Yeah, act as if the guy spoke and nobody heard it, and you didn't hear it, and you just go on talking about whatever the fuck you wanted to talk about. That's actually the best way to handle a question you don't want to answer. But say there's a question that is more insistent. The guy says, "Where are you from?" and you just blow it off. And then he asks again, "Where are you from?" He keeps like needling you. And what do you do? What do you do in that situation? Well, what you don't do in that situation is have a fucking meltdown. And you don't say, "I don't have to answer that question." Because if you make a to-do about not answering a question or stating outright that you're not going to answer a question, then that question becomes of interest. People want to know. People want to know why you don't want to answer that question. Yeah. And so you refusing to answer a specific question that somebody puts at you and insists, right? Yeah, you refusing to answer becomes an issue and people want to know. And something that might have been completely innocuous, right, that you didn't answer where you came from, say, for whatever silly reason, that was not particularly important, all of a sudden it acquires enormous importance because you said, "I don't want to answer that question." That answer, that non-answer, or what you think is a non-answer, it is an answer. So when a question comes up that you don't want to answer, apart from the possibility of ignoring it, you do not say, "I don't want to answer that question." No. What you do is you redirect the conversation. You redirect it with a question of your own or a witticism. Say, for the sake of argument in this video, that you don't want to answer the question, "Where do you come from?" right? So one way to answer that question would be to be witty and say, "Oh, I come from a shithole that's so awful that I'm trying to forget it." And leave it at that, and people will laugh. And where do they go with that? Okay, you came from some awful place and you don't really want to talk about it because people are not stupid. I mean, if you say in a joking way that you came from a place that you don't really like and are glad to be gone from, then they're going to be polite and they're not going to be pushing you about it. You see what I'm saying? So if you throw out a witticism, yeah, then all of a sudden, it makes everybody get on your side, and the person questioning you doesn't have any place to go. Because if they repeat the question after the laughter dies down, "Oh, so where do you come from?" everybody's going to be like, "What a dick, leave him alone." Yeah? The people around you are going to be on your side. You see? Now, apart from witticism, there is, of course, redirection by way of a question of your own. This is a strategy that's extremely effective in debates, okay? Or let me phrase you. It's not really effective in debates, informal debates. It's effective with people who are trying to win an argument, right? And might actually have a weak hand. And this is, of course, the problem when you are asked a question that you don't want to answer, because it could be that you don't want to answer it, or it could be that you don't know the answer, right? So a good way to handle a question you don't want to answer is to flip it back with a question of your own. For instance, with the question of where do you come from, you ask him, oh, well, where do you come from? Is it important for some reason? And you flip it like that. You ask them where they come from, and then you ask, why do you want to know? What's the big deal with where I come from? Yeah? And you see, all of a sudden, you were asked a question that you didn't want to answer for whatever reason. You flipped it around, judo-like, aimed it at the person, and not only aimed it right back at the person, but put the onus on them, because now they have to answer why it is that they were asking this particular question. Why is it important for them? You see? There are lots of reasons, an infinite number of reasons, why you don't want to answer a question. It could be that you don't know the answer, like I said before. It could be that the answer will show some weakness on your part or leave the door open for some attack or some whatever. Or it could be that you just don't want to answer the question because painful memories, unhappiness about it. I mean, like, for instance, let's just say for the sake of argument that you came from some town or some city that was, some small town where you had a miserable time and you moved away and your life is so much better. And, it's just bad memories. And so you don't want to talk about it, which is a perfectly legitimate reason. I mean, you see, there are an infinite number of reasons, perfectly legitimate reasons, not to answer a question, okay? I mean, I'm talking about it in a social setting, of course. You have to be able to handle these questions that you don't want to answer. And you have to be prepared beforehand. Yeah? And I insist, the worst thing that you can do is make a to-do about a question you don't want to answer. Yeah, because it focuses everybody. It focuses everybody, and now all of a sudden they know that, oh, that's the question that this guy doesn't want to answer. And it's going to be on the forefront of their mind, right? So, ignoring the question, making a joke out of the question, or flipping the question around on the person asking. Those are the three basic strategies, okay? And you apply any of these three strategies, and more likely than not, the question will just go away, and people will forget about the question. Now, why am I bringing up this particular topic? Why am I doing this video, as a matter of fact? Well, because, you see, young people especially, how can I put this? When you're young, adults in your life, your parents or your teachers and whomever, they ask you questions and they basically expect answers. They expect answers, and they're not going to accept you just blowing them off or flipping the question around. And so what happens is that a lot of times young people, young guys, they're in their late teens, early 20s, and they feel very resentful when they're asked something. And they feel very resentful when they're asked something, especially something that they don't want to answer. And so rather than try to manage the question, as I've explained that you can manage it, they lash out at the person asking it. And they make a mess for themselves, yeah? Because the question might be innocuous, the question might be very sensitive and touchy. It can go through the gamut, right? But how you handle such an impertinent question can make your life either very easy or very difficult. And this is something that young guys don't understand, okay? And they are feeling very resentful because they've spent the first, 16, 18, 20 odd years of their lives answering questions. And they finally realize that they are at a point where they don't have to answer a question. And so rather than being clever, being socially adept at avoiding a question they don't want to answer, they lash out. They lash out and they create enmity. They create enmity with the person asking a question, who often is not going to be asking a question, for perfectly innocuous and or legitimate reasons, right? But this lashing out this lashing out will hurt you. Why would you do that? Yeah, you don't lash out at somebody asking you some question, whether it be legitimate or not, whether it be framed politely or impertinently. If somebody asks you a question that you don't want to answer, not only don't answer it, but be smart. Handle the social situation in a way where you get something out of it. Or let me phrase that. Handle it in such a way where you are not socially injured. Yeah? Because, I mean, like, think about it. You have like a mini confrontation with somebody. Somebody asks you where you come from, right? And you don't want to answer that for whatever reason, right? And so you say to them, what business is of yours? It's my problem where I come from. Leave me alone, don't ask me questions, and fuck off, right? So all of a sudden you've created like a scene with the guy who asked you this question. Maybe the guy knew that he was being a dick by asking it. Maybe he had no idea. And assume generosity here, that most of the time people ask questions just because they're curious, just because they want to know. They don't have any ulterior motive, right? But you, rather than handling the question, you lashed out at the guy. And the guy, what's he going to think? He's going to think either you're an asshole, if he was just asking a question just to pass the time, right? Or he's going to think that you have serious issues. Or if he was trying to get a rise out of you, he's going to smile because he got a rise out of you. And he's going to know that asking where you come from is a surefire way to get a rise out of you in the future. Yeah. And what do you think he's going to do? Do you think he's going to ignore it? No! He's going to fucking, needle you with this question. You automatically gave him a fucking weapon against you. Yeah, that's what you did. Young guys do this all the time. How do I know that young guys do this all the time? Because I did it all the time when I was young. A lot of times when people would ask me something that I didn't feel like answering, or was a touchy subject, a sensitive topic, right? I'd lash out. Sometimes I'd lash out just because I was pissed off about other shit in my life, and I didn't know how to handle the frustration and anger I had on this other shit. And so I'd lash out at somebody, and say, well, what business is of yours? Fuck off, leave me alone. I don't have to answer your fucking questions, right? Which is just immature, it's juvenile, it's stupid. We were all there. I was there, you were there, we've all been there, okay? And so that's why I'm telling you, you who are young, you who are presumably in this boat, because older guys listening to me, they're going to be nodding because they know. They fucking know because they were there. We've all been there. And so understand, when you are confronted with a question that you don't want to answer, don't lash out. Control yourself. Control yourself and use these strategies, these simple strategies, these 3 approaches. Silence, just ignoring it, a witticism, or just a judo flip and reframe. Those are the 3 ways that you solve this problem of a question that you don't want to answer. It happens all the time. It happens all the time in your life, and you have to be prepared for it. Don't fall into the trap of always getting pissed off when somebody asks you something that you don't want to answer or can't answer. No, never fall into this trap, because it becomes a habit. It becomes a habit, and you see it. There are certain guys who always get pissed off. They always get pissed off when they are hit with a question that they either don't know the answer to or don't want to answer for whatever legitimate reasons, right? And they lash out, and it hurts them in the long run. This simple tool, the simple ability to not answer a question you don't want to answer, but in a way that is socially, how can I put it, socially acceptable. This is a valuable tool that you should learn. Practice it. Practice it as much as you can. And sometimes if somebody asks you something reasonable that you don't really give a shit about, like, I don't know, like the weather or some shit like that, try it out then. Try it out there with that question. They ask, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? And, try out a witticism, because it's going to be a low pressure situation for you, and you'll probably be able to come up with some witticism. Or try flipping it around somehow. I don't know. I'm just giving you an example. I'm giving you strategies so that you practice, because remember, you can never get good at anything without practicing it a lot, okay? And this is a skill that you want to get good at. Long term, it will help you. It will help you in every human interaction that you have. You always want to have control of the conversation. And knowing how to manage a question you do not want to answer is the first step